All right, hey everyone, thank you all for being here. We'll wait just a moment to get started, but once again, thanks for coming. All right, hello everyone. My name is Kaylin, and welcome to a conversation with North Carolina conservative female leaders. This event was organized by the Institute of Politics, which is a student organization dedicated to engaging and inspiring students to pursue careers in politics and public service. This panel is part of the IOP's Speaker Series program. The Speaker Series brings knowledgeable individuals with a substantial background in fields of politics and public service to UNC Chapel Hill to engage in substantive conversations with students, faculty, and other members of the university community. Please check out their website if you want to learn anything else. We are joined today by North Carolina Senator Deanna Ballard, former North Carolina Representative Holly Grange, and VP of Communications at the John Locke Foundation, Brooke Medina. I will start with a few questions, but time will be saved for questions from the audience during the second half of the event. Thank you all so much for being here today. Let's go ahead and get started. So my first question for you three is, many have referred to 2020 as the year of the Republican woman. What do you think has led to more female involvement within the conservative movement?
Who do you want to go first?
You can go ahead and start.
I'll start. First of all, I think women have always been involved in the conservative movement. I just don't think that they have run for office. And it is exciting to see that so many women have been elected to Congress. You know, it's essentially doubled the number of Republican women in the US House. I would argue, though, that we don't do as well in North Carolina electing Republican women for a variety of reasons. In the North Carolina House, we only have 8 out of 69 Republicans. So, and I think we have a little work that we need to do there. So Republicans aren't big on identity politics. We don't normally elect people because they're women or because they're of a certain race. That being said, I think that there's a lot we can do to make our party more attractive to diverse groups. But I will say the women that I know that are in politics are very well educated, they're smart, they are business owners, they're active in their communities, their districts, and and sometimes they're statewide. I think women were successful in Congress because I think that we're trying to follow a model that, the Democrats have used. For instance, Emily's List, trying to get groups to support women, and especially in primaries, because it's harder for a woman to win a primary. And for instance, Elise Stefanik, Congresswoman Stefanik's group, has supported women in primaries, as well as some of the leadership in Congress have actually weighed in on some primaries and supported women, which led to their success.
I'm happy to chime in a little bit on that too, just to echo somewhat of what Holly has mentioned. I really think what's interesting about 2020, and I mean, we alluded to the congressional races and the number of women that ran and were elected, but I also think there's something to be said when you make it a priority within the Republican Party or within the conservative movement. If you make it to get a priority to get involved, if you make it an effort to really engage and to recruit women to run, then I think that's when you start to see the needle being moved. So I think there's a lot of intentional effort in drawing more women and female into being and running for office through the Republican Party and the conservative movement as a whole. So, I mean, I think that's kind of a bit of, I mean, it sounds so elementary, but at the same time, I mean, I think that's really a pragmatic step that made a difference. And you can see that with what Elise did, Stefanik. I worked with Elise in the White House before she ran for Congress. So I know kind of the go-getter that she can be. And when you kind of put your mind to something and you want to make it a priority and follow through with the work that you need to do to accomplish the goal, I mean, you can do it. And when you support one another, I think also what's important, if you know you have someone that's making it a priority and pushing it forward, and then you rally around each other a bit to, as women, to support one another in those efforts too. So I think if you got the support and you really are intentional in making it the effort to recruit more women to get involved, then that's probably can lend itself to the results we've seen.
I think those are some great thoughts, especially on the political side of this. And I would say on more of the philosophical or perhaps the conservative movement side, and you're seeing this surgence of women joining this movement, I believe a lot of them are realizing the bankruptcy of the neo-feminist movement. That's what I'm going to call it, because I don't believe it's true feminism, not in the way in which a Susan B. Anthony or Charlotte Lozier fought for. And so I believe we are starting to see more actively involved women because this is sort of it's a reaction or a response to the way in which many women have been pigeonholed by political movements in the past, or they have tried to characterize us as a certain type of person. And so I think that the conservative surgence of women is a response to that.
I think that's a great point. I'm going to ask a follow-up question, sort of. The modern day feminist movement, which you talk about, it claims that women can do and be whatever they want. However, the movement contradicts this idea by being a monoculture of liberal women. So why do you guys think feminists who claim to be for empowerment of women disregard conservative females and their ideals?
It's a great question. I'll pick that up, and then anyone else who wants
a one-word answer.
But I would say that, so whenever we're going to have a fair debate with someone, we need to define our terms. And I would say that ultra progressives, in a lot of ways, they have controlled the narrative. They've controlled how a woman is defined. They've controlled what feminism means. And so because they have controlled this narrative for quite some time and controlled what it means, what motherhood should look like, what a working professional woman should look like, and so when you control that sort of narrative in some elements, but I would say with the dispersion of media and the ways in which media has changed so much, and we've democratized it in many ways where anybody and their mom can open up a blog, we're seeing a pushback there. But I would say that that's why we see so many, this monoculture that you had referenced. And once again, I'm going to refer back to that previous question you asked, though. I would say there's a groundswell of pushback on that as of late. And so I don't know if 10 years from now, we're still going to be asking that same exact question. I think there will be a lot more diversity of thought.
Representative Grange, do you want to chime into that?
Well, I definitely agree with Brooke. It's all about the definition of what feminism. It has been defined by others, not necessarily those of us who really agree with a lot of the tenets of feminism, the equality, that people, we all believe that women should be CEOs, that women should have opportunities available to them. But it really comes down to the reason that a liberal woman would call me not a feminist is because of abortion. Conservative women generally are pro-life. And the fact that the definition of feminism has revolved around that one issue. And so that would exclude me from being a feminist, even though I consider myself one. I consider myself as a good example of a feminist, but I just am pro-life. I'm not pro-abortion.
I mean, echo a little bit of what they've said too. I just think really if it just, they like to just disregard anything that doesn't necessarily fit their narrative or their understanding and ideology of what they understand conservatism to be or choice. I mean, if it just doesn't fit what singularly thinking they have on the issue, then it just gets dismissed or disregarded. So, I mean, that's kind of, I think, where that lands at the end of the day. And I think, they still operate in a bit of a past tense in terms of just, yeah, you're right. I mean, like Holly's saying, understanding what the role of women and what conservative really, kind of means. So, I mean, it's taken on, I'm all about female empowerment. I mean, does that make me a feminist? So I think those are kind of the conversations you need to have. I'm a young professional, successful working woman. And what makes me different than like someone else, and other than maybe my political party? But yet I'm still fighting for, believing in hard work and that I should be compensated for the work that I do. And so I just think it's just the thinking and the approach lots of times to those conversations. So
yeah, I agree. And one more question along these lines of like liberal, conservative. I'm going to talk about identity politics a little bit. And like identity politics is huge today, as we know, and it makes people often ask us, how can you be a woman and still be a conservative, still be a Republican? What do you have to say to people who still think this way and still are categorizing women into a subcategory of political party?
I'm going to start off with a little story. This past election, I have a 17-year-old daughter, and she was on Instagram, of course, waded into an Instagram debate. Like, who does that? Everybody actually does that, but we should not do that. Do not do it, but we do it. And so she got in this DM exchange with someone who was like, you're Hispanic. You should not be, supporting these sorts of values. I think it was a pro-life debate, actually. And so they pigeonholed her because she was female and she was Hispanic. Therefore, she should vote a certain way. She should, she should support certain causes. And to me, that's just the epitome of condescending. And so I don't know if I have a real kind response to people like that. I want to be gracious to them because I think that sometimes they just don't understand. But, you're around long enough and you deal with these sorts of arguments long enough. And even I'm sure many of you are dealing with these in college and getting this sort of pushback. But you just realize not everybody deserves a response to certain things and certain claims. And we don't always have to justify our position on certain things. And so I just, for example, told my daughter, just shut it down. And, some people just don't want to understand. But you look for the ones that do want to understand, and you communicate with them graciously and winsomely, and then just cut your losses with some of the others.
I agree. I don't think that we need to get in that type of dialogue, that type of conflict. But I will say that I'm proud to be a conservative woman, and I'm proud of my accomplishments. I've worked very hard for what I've accomplished. Nothing was given to me. My success is due to my faith, my family, and hard work. And so, that's my response. The government hasn't given me anything. I've worked very hard for what I've accomplished.
I mean, just on that same note, I guess the question is like, why? What do I have to say to those people, I guess, who kind of think that way? I mean, I kind of just reject the notion of it. I think there's two motives underlying feminism, or identity politics like feminism. So one's like the true empowerment of women who as equals in kind of the social structure that we have that's long subjugated them. That's, I think, to be cheered and embraced. And then the second is really using this kind of movement like feminism as this stalking horse, for voter mobilization to benefit one political party. And I think that's really kind of the spectrum that's like just to be rejected. And so it's like, how do you tell the difference? Well, I think it's difficult, at times, but I think any organization claiming to support, female empowerment, while simultaneously rejecting women who harbor a particular set of views is really, an example of kind of the latter. So I would just keep those kind of two underlying themes, I guess, in perspective and understanding of what, how you might identify your own self and understanding that about who you are.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Something I always do on my college campus, because I'm surrounded by it, obviously, is like knowing what I believe and why. So off of that, what values of the conservative movement, the conservative party, attract you all the most?
I'm a big like land of opportunity, give me opportunity. I want to walk through that door, cheering folks on who, I've like Holly, like we worked hard and I have no problem working hard. I'm not like, begrudging hard work just to get where I am. I embrace hard work. I'm proving myself, I'm growing and I'm learning. So don't resist working hard to get where you want to go. I think that's true for everyone. But, I am a pro family, pro Second Amendment, limited government, states' right, pro business. Like I'm supportive of women in the workplace, but I have a lot of friends who are also, who are moms and are gifted at things that I am not gifted at, but yet they are. So cheering each other on and supporting them in the roles and the giftings that they have, I think is important. But as a party and as a Republican, I think those are definitely some values that I would say that, I value. I share with kids all the time, hard work pays off and people do pay attention. So I started out as a volunteer at the age of, it was 22 at the time. I volunteered when President George W. Bush came to Charlotte for an event. It turned into one opportunity after another. And because they came up to me and they were like, hey, you worked really hard. Would you be interested in doing anything more? Next thing you know, I spent the rest of 2002 traveling the country, setting up, political campaign events for Vice President Cheney. Turned into a full-time job in administration, and 7 years later was walking out of the White House, on the final day of the Bush administration. So the same day as the president. So I tell people all the time, never be afraid to just work hard and not be in it for what's in it for me and that mentality, but, do your job well. And people will notice and people do pay attention. My family does not we're not from Texas. We weren't from Texas. I'm from North Carolina, not big political donors. Not politically active, but again, I just sort of took a risk, took a chance, showed up, did some free work, and it turned into an incredible opportunity of literally working in the White House and with the administration for 7.5 years, where I traveled to over 60 countries. And that all happened in the course of 7 years. And so you just never know what can take place. So I'm a big, opportunity, power of the individual, empowering one another. So Holly, I'm sure can speak into that wholeheartedly as well.
Yes, I agree 100%. Personal responsibility, I think, is really important. And I think that's a conservative principle that I really stand by. Limited government, again, give people the freedom to do that hard work. Limited regulation, free market principles, things like that. Quality education. As a conservative, I believe that children learn differently, and that that school choice is very important. I'm a big supporter of our Opportunity Scholarship Program in North Carolina. To help underprivileged children attend private school. That's a conservative principle of mine. And of course, because of my military background, I think it's important that we have a strong national defense.
I love all of those responses, and a hearty amen from me. I would just add a couple more that have resonated with me and drawn me more into the conservative sphere are that the understanding and the respect for human dignity, and that we are each endowed with inalienable rights. Like that's just in our Constitution. It makes me even want to cry just thinking about it. It's understanding that people have the right to be able to chart their own course, and creating the landscape economically, culturally, and otherwise vocationally, wherein they can actually pursue those things. Like that gets back to does a person have value, and do they have the right and the a say so over their own lives? Because the more we grow government, the less we actually affirm that truth. And so when we stand up for that conservative value, then I would say that we're doing God's work in a way on that front. And then two other values that just really resonate with me are ordered liberty, understanding that we have liberty, but with liberty actually comes some responsibility too. And so it's not just liberty for all so that we can do whatever the heck we want. I mean, we can if we want to, but if we want a society, then we actually have responsibilities as well. And so I would say that's crucial to conservatism, and it's central to it. And then just the robust nature of civil society. So when I say civil society, I mean all those other institutions that don't end with .gov on their website. So we're talking businesses, we're talking churches, community organizations, things like that, that actually are like the thick center of America. That's what makes up American communities. And I like that conservatism actually acknowledges that they exist and that they should be supported.
I really appreciate those answers. I think it's encouraging for me, especially to hear when we talk about our values, and like it brings us back to why we do this, why we believe what we believe. So on that, you guys are all really successful in your fields. What accomplishment as a leader are you most proud of?
I'm going to give you 3, and that's because I'm the oldest woman on the panel. So I deserve 3 because I've done a lot. I think that my first accomplishment as a leader that I was very proud of was being the first 300 women to graduate from West Point. And that was a long time ago. You guys can start doing the math and figure out how old I am. Also, I'm proud of my time in the military. I was an Army engineer officer at a time that there were only about 2% of women as Army engineer officers. And I actually commanded men. I was a commander, and I was very proud of my time doing that. And I have been very proud of my time in the legislature, where I was a deputy conference chair for both of my terms, committee chair, and I got a lot of legislation passed. And I'm really proud of the legislation that I got through that helps veterans, military, and military spouses, and first responders. So those, I would say, are my 3 things.
Brooke, you can go ahead. I'm thinking. I don't really know.
Okay. Well, those are really impressive accomplishments to follow up with. So I do not have that sort of political history, but I am so appreciative of women like Representative Grange and Senator Ballard that are on the front lines of this in that arena. So thank you. I would say in my role, the way I view my accomplishments are, if I am transmitting these conservative values onto others, like conservative movement cannot rise and fall within one generation. If there are people like us and like you all championing it and passing it on to the next generation. And so that's how I measure success is, am I actually evangelizing in the conservative movement, like bringing other people into it to show them that there is beauty in this world, and it extends beyond just an extensive regulatory state. and so, holding the line on that front and passing that along to others. And, just being a mom, that's an accomplishment. And I feel like I'm leading my kids, and not everybody's going to have that role in their life, but for me, it's one, and I am grateful that I can have a job and a vocation and feel fulfilled in that, but also go home to my kids.
I would say for me, it wasn't even as I was, I guess, a leader, but I mean, an accomplishment. I was the first one in my family to go to a 4-year college. So even at your age, I mean, you can make decisions and have accomplishments that have nothing to do with necessarily leading a group of people or, a team or anything like that. And I have 2 brothers, so I'm a middle child. I'm, the only granddaughter on both sides of the family. So it's funny because, my family jokes and gives me a hard time. Like, you want to get something done? Let's talk to Dee, But that was really telling, I think, for me and my family. And it empowered my mom and encouraged my mom at the age of 50 to go back to school and get her teaching degree. So she had seen kind of even the steps I took and the risks and the boldness there. and she went back and got her 4-year, teaching degree at the age of 50. So, I mean, that's really kind of, you just never know what kind of impact and what decisions you make you're going to have on other people. I was also, one of the younger female, White House is called commissioned officers, which is very fortunate to be able to be a part of. But it's a commission that the president gives you, and you're equivalent to a 2-star general. You have it for life. Comes with all these little perks and everything. It's great, but to be have regarded by the president of the United States as someone deserving of a commission was really, very, very satisfying and humbling at the same time. And to have done that even by the time I was 30 was really, special. And then even my term in the Senate, I mean, the work that I do every day and serving my constituents feels like an accomplishment, because I'm just helping folks who do not understand state government, how to navigate different agencies, the bills that we're working on, whether it's in education or, healthcare or businesses. I mean, there's so many things we work on every day that make a difference. And I think that's where, one thing between federal government and state government, folks need to understand too, there's a lot of good work that gets done at the state level. And sometimes it gets done swifter and a little bit more, you feel the impact and the satisfaction of it a bit more immediately, or faster than you would if you were working, on the federal side of things. But I came in and was also, I think, the youngest female Republican serving in the General Assembly for the last 5 years, maybe, I can't remember. Those are all, I mean, I have to say, like, I probably would get a little bit more pushback on things I've accomplished because of my age as opposed to anything regarding my gender. So I tend to run into that a bit more than the female side of things. So that's another conversation we could probably have at some point.
Yeah, for sure. That was all great. I'm really impressed. But my final question for you all, it goes off of Senator Ballard's comment about young people, but what is your advice for young female conservatives like myself, like other college students?
Don't ever let a man tell you that you can't run for office is one, and because people have told me that. And also I would say, don't be timid or ashamed of your conservatism. Be true to what you believe in. But realize that other people have different views, but be true to yourself.
I wholeheartedly agree. Be who you are. Don't be afraid to be who you are. Embrace who you are. If you're still trying to figure things out, don't feel like, I mean, that's okay. You don't have to have everything figured out. I mean, you will grow and you will learn and you will develop. You will sharpen your skill set as you get older, and it just takes time. But I would say surround yourself with people that believe in you, and also maybe share some of your values and your ideas. But also, I love to color my life with people who disagree with me, and we don't. So I think that's healthy, and I think a good balance of that's important. But as long as you are true and solid and kind of who you understanding what you believe and what you value is key to that. But just be bold and courageous. So.
Such great advice. Definitely agree with that. I would add a couple more things. Be confident, certainly, but also know that you don't have to be perfect. It's okay. Like, there is just so much pressure nowadays to just excel at everything or give the appearance that you're excelling at everything. And that's just not life. Like, none of us are able to do that. We're just not all going to be 10s at everything. And I don't know if anybody does the Enneagram, but I'm an Enneagram type 3. So I'm what they call the achiever. Like, I'm driven, and I got to always try to do everything right. I'll always be perfect at things. And we can beat ourselves down at that. So I would say this is just advice, life advice for free. And it just extends beyond conservatism, is show yourself some grace. And when you're able to do that, you can show others grace too, even when they disagree with you on political issues or a whole host of other things. So that's one thing, but also just be humble too. It's okay to be humble. We don't have to peacock all the time, but we can also humble isn't, it's not like thinking less of yourself or anything like that either. You can be humble but while still being confident. So I think that those are two things that we can hold in tension. It's like a paradox. And then just be strategic. I would say there are times in which you're going to have to kind of push some doors open for yourself. And so thinking strategically through what that looks like, and not waiting for permission for certain things. You just got to kind of go for it sometimes. I mean, I'm sure Representative Grange walking into West Point in those days when it just was not as common. I mean, you have to kind of, clear some room at the table for yourself, and that's okay. And that's not being humble either, though. That's just being confident and knowing that you have something to contribute, and you can do so in a way that's strategic and winsome. So
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate that. Now we're going to transition into questions from the audience. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, you can use the raise your hand feature or the chat, and we can get your questions answered.
I have a question. I'm not sure how to use the raise your hand feature, so I just thought I would ask it really quickly. Okay, so my question was, which you all pretty much touched on this a little bit, but typically conservative women tend to be a little more quiet about their beliefs just because they don't want to be seen as not pro-woman or be attacked by more liberal women, which I think every conservative woman on this call has had some kind of experience like this in the past. But with the record amount of women that have run seats at the local and state level and federal level for the past election, for our upcoming midterms, do you think that we'll have a lot more women continue to run? Or how do you think that will go? Because we have seen a lot more women, which they've always been there, but now they have more of a platform through social media showing that they are unapologetically conservative. So how do you think that will go in the upcoming elections?
I do think you're only going to see an increase in more women running. And I think that also has to do with just the female leadership within the party to sort of recruit and to support and to come around other women who have just as much to offer. It's no more this view of like, I think they just need to stop, folks need to stop seeing this as sometimes like this Chamber of Commerce woman versus like the Second Amendment woman. I mean, we're kind of falling out of that sort of profile to a degree, and we have a lot of intellect and knowledge to bring to the table and capacity. And you will notice that, a lot of women, we get things done. We like to work, and we like to just keep moving, keep the train moving and get things done. So I just think you're going to see more of that as we continue over the years. And it may not be, it's going to take time, just like everything. But I think as we continue to move along, you'll see the landscape sort of change a bit more. I don't know if Holly has anything else to add to that.
Well, I agree. I do think it's going to take time. We've long been thought of, the Republican women, conservative women have been perfectly content kind of being in the background, not being very active, but not at the levels, out in the public eye. And I think that there are a lot of examples now of success of that. And I think that more women are going to be interested. I have a lot of young people contact me that really want to know how I got into public office. Why did I do it? How did I go about it? So, I think that we have a responsibility as women who've been in politics or are in politics to mentor some of these young women and kind of encourage them and help them along the way.
Which is part of the reason for this conversation. Why I even participate is because I want to have discussion on this. I want everyone to understand what you are capable of. You're going to see more and more of this. It's great. Embrace it and be open to it, and don't be fearful of it. So I think that's why I try to do so much as well, and participating in these kind of conversations and panels, but also when I'm out with folks too. So.
Hunter, you can go ahead.
Great. Thank you guys so much for talking tonight. It's been really enjoyable. I have a specific question. What current projects are you guys working on right now, and how, if at all, do you think your role as a conservative woman impacts your success in those projects?
I'll just chime in with a few that we're working on. I like that question. That's fun. So at Locke, for example, we've been working with legislators, but also helping educate the public on a suite of policy issues that particularly affect them. If you look at polling in particular, but just how people are voting, they really care a lot about healthcare issues, for example, and education. Those are super important to folks. And so helping them grapple with what does actual affordable healthcare access look like versus the narrative that is often peddled, which is let's just hurry up and give everyone healthcare, showing them, okay, well, you might have a healthcare card or whatever, but can you actually have access to that healthcare? And, helping people walk the public through what that actually looks like by repealing things such as the Certificate of Need law, which is essentially kind of like this way in which the government issues a certificate, the state government issues a certificate to hospitals or other healthcare providers, telling them, okay, now you can set up shop here, or you can have this particular piece of equipment. So showing people like these are actually weird, funky laws on the books over here. So that's a project we're doing, is just educating the public on that. And another project that I'm working on is I sit on the board of directors at ReCity Network, which is in Durham, North Carolina. And we just focus on helping civil society, such as nonprofits, social entrepreneurs, faith groups, be able to help the people of Durham, especially those that are stuck in poverty. So that's how I live out my conservatism outside of the policy world, is, well, if I really believe that government isn't the answer to all these things, what am I doing to actually help bolster the private organizations that I do think can help on that front? And so that's what I'm doing at ReCity and how I'm bringing my conservatism over there.
As I'm not in public office anymore, I still am very involved in my community, and I serve on several boards in Wilmington. One being one I'm very proud of, and I've been on the board for 7 or 8 years now, is Coastal Horizon Center, which is drug treatment, rehabilitation, and mental health services, and primary care to those patients. So I'm very proud of that, because as you know, there's a big opioid problem in this country, and North Carolina has not been spared with that. So I'm very involved with that. And my side business, my day job, is more of a consulting capacity for my husband's company and for businesses in North Carolina that are trying to expand and move into certain areas. My focus being Eastern North Carolina, because that's where I live.
I think first of all, women have to talk about what women bring to the table in the projects, I guess, we're working on. But I think as a whole, women have a knack for being helpful in a lot of tense or sometimes hard conversations. So, we have a different approachability sometimes than men. So sometimes folks feel like they can really work with us, talk to us, and be responsive. There's, I think, a resourcefulness to women too. We just, tend to make do with what we have sometimes, and operate with that mindset to a degree, but also think outside the box. I think we can be, it's funny, I joke sometimes that men's brains are like, a waffle maker. So they have their compartments, but we women tend to be like scrambled eggs and just kind of mix everything together and just really know how to pull this and that together and make stuff happen too. And then I think women are really strong, also just communicators. So we're willing to kind of speak more verbally. We're not, internalizing maybe as much, and we are able to kind of express different viewpoints, or help translate what this person is saying over here to help folks understand what's really kind of happening. So I would say that even those are kind of qualities that you might want to just think about even in your own, your own day to day and what you bring to the table in that area, because those are all areas that I actually, folks have said I've made a difference in the Senate, and bringing, really being able to bring all folks to the table to work through and have those hard conversations. So, as far as projects, I mean, I'm working on a lot of different things, definitely education. Education in the Republican side of the Senate has often been led by men. And so those efforts have now kind of changed space, having me kind of in the mix. And I think that has afforded some new narratives and new dialogues, while also still, operating with a bit of a firm, backbone too. It's funny, I had someone that actually described me as having the warmth of a kindergarten teacher, but the spine of a principal. So I think that's really kind of telling to know that, they've noticed the education sector and the sector leaders and just folks throughout the state, appreciate a little bit of a change of face on at the front of education issues. And that's anything from what I've been doing this week. I don't know if you've kept up, but reopening schools. And then we're doing a lot with early literacy and improving kind of the K-3 reading efforts here in the state as well. So, and I love anything another project I love is really streamlining. So you'll see me lots of times trying to consolidate different programs or efforts within state government, even in the education sector, as we look at scholarship programs potentially, and what we can do to really make things a bit more student-friendly, user-friendly, whomever the services, and working to support. I'm all about really trying to clean things up in those areas too. So anyway, that was long-winded, but I just want to encourage you guys to.
I think just to add to that, I think the women that I've worked with in the legislature have, we tend to sit back and listen a little more. We don't just speak to hear our voices, which I hate to say, a lot of men, that's very important to them, that they are heard every day. But I think that we're able to kind of sit back and evaluate and really bring people together and find that consensus and get things accomplished. And I worked on a bill in the beginning of COVID on election, the election law to kind of modify some of our procedures because of COVID. And that was a bipartisan bill, and we had in both chambers, we were able to get bipartisan votes, but it took a lot of effort. Not everybody got what they wanted, but we stood firm on some things. The other side of the aisle stood firm on some things, but we were able to actually get something through. And I think our election process went rather smoothly in North Carolina because of it. With the exception of the courts weighing in, but the legislature did their job. And it was mainly because women were involved.
Thank you all for that. Are there any other questions in the audience? Emma, yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to ask, how have you seen, or how do you think you've seen the conservative movement change, over the past 4 years, and how do you think that it will, change in the coming years as well?
The conservative movement, as a whole?
Just, your view of it, kind of. How, in North Carolina, nationally, kind of, however you want to take that.
I think that we'll see the conservative movement become more diverse racially. I really do, because I think that people are seeing the benefit of some of the initiatives that have, come down and things that have been able to be accomplished. So I think that we will see more diversity, and I encourage that, and I look forward to that.
So one way I've seen it change, and I don't want to sound like a negative Nancy, but it's just been a concern, is there has, I would say there's been a lot more infighting in the conservative movement as we've battled over various perspectives, especially at the federal level regarding trade, just as spending, things like that, things that were historically I would say by and large, something that conservatives could agree upon. There's been more infighting. And I would say that's in part due because there has been this growth of populism on both sides, on the left and the right. And so there are new dynamics at play, and we're beginning to once again wrestle with some of our core values. Like, what does it mean to be conservative? Which goes back to earlier in our conversation when we're talking about, well, what's it mean to be a feminist? What's it mean to be a woman? Like, we have to define our terms. And conservatism, however, though, should be a big tent. Like Representative Grange said, we want to be welcoming and bring in more and more voters and people that can see the benefits of free enterprise and free markets. But we also have to grapple with some first principle issues, such as, do we truly believe in limited government? Do we believe that regulation should always be perhaps maybe further down the road rather than the immediate response because something happens on social media that we don't like, for example? And so I would say the dialogue and the disagreements are coming to the surface. And so we're in a time of conservatism where we're really having to grapple with and wrestle with some first principle issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is tough because I think everything about politics has changed so much in the last decade. From when I left DC in 2009, I mean, 10 years, and so much happened in 10 years that has really just changed the pace and the conversations. So I think that's going to be really hard to see kind of how. I'll tell you, I mean, my White House experience was very different than, some folks I know that worked in the Trump White House. It was also very different than folks that worked in the Obama White House. So it's just, I don't know. I mean, it develops. I think there's new developments every cycle. But I think you will see strength in really understanding what Brooke was a little bit saying, what do we really believe? And so I think that's going to kind of be emboldened a bit more, but not necessarily in a way that I hope is like divisive and the infighting. I think that will sort of start to hopefully sort of wane and, veer off, so to speak. But I don't know. I think that's just going to be tough as we move forward. But that's why, I mean, we are strong women, and we're willing to just keep speaking into what we hold true and what we want to protect. And, I mean, we're concerned about poverty too. I mean, lots of times we get wrapped into these, we don't care about these issues because, of how we're approaching it or speaking about it or doing about it. But lots of times there's a lot of work that's being done on these things. It's just not getting the coverage, or, we're not talking about it enough. So, I mean, those are things we all can kind of work on, even as the Conservative Party is really shaping more of the narrative on what we are getting done well and doing well and what we are speaking into. I mean, the opioid issue that Holly mentioned, I think there's not enough conversation going on about what we have done even at a state level in order to combat that. And so I don't know, there's just a lot of different areas like that we can just do a better job of I think the liberals do a better job of kind of shouting their messages and using the volume button to the max. And I just don't think we've quite understood how to do that in a productive and effective way yet. And I think there's more room there. So.
That's why we're happy you're here, Brooke, because that's your job. Communications. We need better communications.
Thank you. Well, yeah, listening to Senator Ballard say that, I completely agree. It's just as important how you say something as what you're saying if you want people to listen. And so, there are going to be people on the far left or the far right that just won't listen. And I don't think we have to spin all of our wheels trying to convince them otherwise. They're going to have to come around a different way. But those that are in that persuadable middle, I'd say that's who on your campuses, who you can target to engage in respectful dialogue with. And so I think we must get better at doing that and not hiding from these conversations, but really welcoming them and doing so, I've said it before, but in a winsome way, in a way that's not just off-putting and abrasive, but just says, hey, you know what? I'm confident enough in my position that I welcome debate about this, and we can talk about this. And I still value you as a person, even if we walk away from this with two different opinions.
And just know the truth. I mean, know your facts. I had that misinformation. There's so much misinformation out there. So, I mean, I spent today, like even this morning, responding to some emails that was just, I mean, they were just flat out misinformation. And so I kindly just, I don't know this person from wherever, Union County. And I just simply say, well, actually, here's the details of the bill. This is what it does. And she's like, oh, well, that's not what I was told. And then I had another one that emailed me, and she had some solid questions. So I just picked up the phone and called her and answered her questions. So, just know, don't be afraid to educate people about, things that may be misunderstood, or you kind of know something differently, but do it in a way that's not threatening or condescending by any means, but be approachable in it. So, I mean, those little touches go a long way. I would always encourage you to do that. Don't be afraid of those hard conversations and just picking up the phone and just being like, hey, you got a minute? I'd like to talk to you about this. Or, those little touches just really go a long way and make a big difference. So don't underestimate that either.
I have a follow-up question on that. You were all talking about like having conversations and changing the narrative with our conversations with people. But what about on a broader scale with the media? I feel like the left has a monopoly on the media and the narrative they produce. So like, how do we combat that and start changing the narrative? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I'll just share my own experience, and it's going to look a little different for everybody. But there are a couple things. You can drown out misinformation by correct information. The internet's democratized now. I mean, we can run ads on Google, well, provided they're not censoring us. But you can do things to get your voice out there in a way that you don't have to go through the traditional media anymore. They were the gatekeepers at one point in time, but they're not anymore in the way that they previously were. So people can reach other folks by just looking for different channels of communication. This is going on YouTube later, it sounds like. And so that's one way that we're reaching people that we wouldn't have otherwise reached with maybe WRAL. But then another component to this is just being able to have relationships with the media. So as a communications professional, I actually reach out to these journalists, even the ones that I know maybe aren't going to treat me as fairly or are skeptical of me, and they think they're being fair, but they're just really skeptical because they have a perception of people on the right. And so actually reaching out to them to have coffee with them has really helped be able to bring Locke or Civitas before, when I was at Civitas, to the table and at least have some discussions with them, was because I was able to humanize myself to them. So I would say humanizing ourselves by proactively seeking out media interactions is helpful as well. As long as you feel comfortable with the media, I wouldn't throw yourself into something and then, get eaten by the sharks on that front. Always do so with wisdom. So if you got a question about it, feel free to shoot me an email first.
Yeah, I would just say be smart about who you're engaging with, how you respond. I mean, everything social media on Twitter, just be careful about who you sort of go toe to toe with. Sometimes I direct message people and be like, hey, I'd love to talk to you by phone about this, as a way to kind of not continue some ongoing debate back and forth for, everyone to kind of chime into. It's not that you're afraid to have a conversation. It's just, I feel like I could be more convincing or present my case a little bit, in a better, stronger way, even if we just talked about it. The media side is hard because we can kind of like feed information out the door as much as we can, but yet they still will run with incorrect or misleading information, and that gets to be difficult. So sometimes it is about, as Brooke was saying too, I mean, sometimes you just build relationships with folks and build relationships with reporters who, tend to be more fair-minded, who are going to help share, this quote or, the latest story on this, or So you kind of have to build a relationship, develop a little bit of a pathway of trust, which can be tricky, but you can do that as you go along. I mean, I've engaged in our student newspapers. I represent App State. So, I mean, I've engaged multiple times up there with them. I've reached out, I've invited them to coffee, and that's just as a way to kind of diffuse any sort of like potential attack when they don't even know me from Adam. So sometimes I do kind of make the extra effort to introduce myself first, because the humanizing component is really important. Then they understand, oh, you don't make any money, or why are you doing this? And you spend all this time. And I mean, so they really start to understand who you are and what you're about, and your drive and your purpose for why you're doing what you do.
I agree. I think it's about building relationships, and you learn very quickly who the media requests you don't respond to, but by their prior work and how you're treated by them, because it's a two-way street. It's got to be mutual respect. And one of the best bits of advice I got when I went to the legislature is, just because the media contacts you and asks you a question does not mean that you have to respond. And so I would pick and choose if it was an issue that was very important to me, that I was worried about misinformation getting out there. I would be happy to answer questions, but then again, you also build those relationships and know who is going to be fair.
I think that's great advice. Thank you all so much. I think we're nearing an hour, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. But thank you all for being here, especially you three women. It's really inspiring to hear you talk about your stories and your advice. I really appreciate that. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Such great questions. Thank you all.
That's
And if you have future questions,
let's do it again.
If you have future questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us individually, and we're happy to talk further. I know, so I can speak for the other ladies on this. I feel sick.
Thank you.
All right. Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
Have a good rest of your week. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.